On the 47th floor of Shin Capital, there was a rule nobody had ever written down. When Jae-won Shin walked through a room, people stopped talking. Not from courtesy, from instinct. The way a forest goes quiet when something dangerous moves through it. Analysts swallowed their laughter. Assistants lowered their voices mid-sentence. Even the espresso machine seemed to hold its breath. For 4 years, that silence was absolute. A law of physics in a building made of glass and fear. Then, one Tuesday morning in October, the law broke. It wasn't a board member. It wasn't a rival. It wasn't anyone who understood what the silence was for. It was a sound nobody in that lobby was prepared to hear. Small, uncertain, and impossibly clear. The voice of a child. A child who had not spoken a single word in 9 months. The most feared man in New York stopped walking, turned round, and did something no one had seen him do in 4 years. He listened. If that single moment already has you leaning in, do me a favor and tap subscribe right now, because the story of how that boy and that man found each other is unlike anything you've heard on this channel. Before we go further, I want to know who's listening tonight. Drop a comment and tell me the city you're watching from and your local time. And I read every comment, and I love seeing how far this little community reaches. And if you believe a child can see something in a person that the whole world missed, hit that like button so more people find this story.
I never should have involved you in this. It was selfish of me to ask you to come here. Now look at the mess we're in. We have your family. If you contact the police, they are dead.
Now, let's go back to the morning. Everything changed. The man who broke the silence of the 47th floor had spent 6 years building it. Jae-won Shin was 29, though the people who worked for him would have guessed older. Not from his face, which was sharp and unlined, but from his eyes. They were the eyes of someone who had been handed too much too early and had decided, somewhere along the way, to feel as little as possible about it. He had inherited Shin Capital at 23. The official story was clean. A founder, a heart attack at 58, a son with steady hands. $3.7 billion in managed assets. A name that opened every door in the financial district. The real story was something Jae-won had spent 6 years burying. His father had not died of a heart attack, and the fortune Jae-won inherited had not come only from honest ledgers. Some of it traced back to rooms his father never spoke about. A network that had once stretched beneath the city like roots beneath a tower. Jae-won had spent every one of those 6 years cutting those roots away, quietly, patiently, one contract at a time. Nobody knew. Not his board, not his lawyers, not the men who still called the old number, expecting the old answers. To the world, he was simply cold, a CEO who never let anyone close enough to ask why. It was easier that way. Cold men don't get questions. So he built his silence floor by floor, and the building learned to live inside it. In a small Brooklyn apartment she could barely afford, Imani Bell was having the worst possible morning. She was 25, 3 weeks into a job she had moved 440 miles to take. She had left Savannah 11 weeks ago. Not for the salary, but for the one thing Georgia couldn't give her anymore. A fresh start for the boy asleep down the hall. Deon was 7. He had his uncle's stubborn cowlick and his grandmother's serious eyes, and 9 months ago he had stopped speaking. Not gradually, all at once. On the night a stranger's voice told Imani that her sister, Renee, Deon's mother, had been in an accident on the interstate. Renee was still recovering. Months of it. Maybe more. And Deon had not said a word since. The doctors had a name for it. Selective mutism, triggered by trauma. They told Imani it could ease with time and safety. That there was no switch to flip, only a long, slow road. She had taken him to a therapist every Thursday for 9 months. She had watched him draw entire worlds in his notebook and hand them to her without a sound. She had learned to read him the way other mothers read words. She had stopped expecting his voice. it hurt less that way. That morning, the universe stacked everything against her at once. His daycare called at 7:38. A burst pipe. The building closed until further notice. Imani stood in one shoe, phone pinned to her shoulder, and did the math no single guardian ever wants to do. No backup, no family in this city. A meeting at 9 she could not miss in her third week. Then, she remembered the flyer. Shin Capital ran a Bring Your Child morning twice a year. Today was one of them. It wasn't permission, exactly, but it wasn't forbidden either. At 7:42, she emailed HR, documented and time-stamped, and got Deon into his coat. "You'll sit right here," she told him on the 12th floor, settling him into a chair near reception with his notebook and his crayons. "You draw me something good. I'll be back before you finish." Deon looked up at her. He didn't nod, but he opened the notebook. That was a yes. Imani made it 40 minutes before everything went wrong. She was 3 floors up, drowning in a spreadsheet, when her phone buzzed, a message from reception. "Is the little boy with you?" He stepped away. Her stomach dropped through the floor. What she didn't know was that Deon had gone looking for a bathroom, taken a wrong turn, and stepped into an elevator that only stopped where its key told it to. The doors had opened on the 47th floor, a floor most employees would never see, and spilled him into a long, cold hallway of glass and quiet. And what she didn't know, what nobody could have known, was that at 9/11 that morning, the building ran its scheduled fire alarm test. The sound hit the boy like a wall, loud, shrieking, the exact pitch of the night 9 months ago. Deon dropped into the corner where 2 glass walls met, pulled his knees to his chest, and went somewhere far away inside himself. That was where Jae-won Shin found him. The most feared man in the building rounded the corner with a meeting in 4 minutes, and he stopped. He did not call for security. He did not crouch and coo. He did not ask the boy what was wrong or where his mother was or who had let a child onto his floor. He simply looked at him for a moment, really looked, and then he sat down, on the floor, in a charcoal suit that cost more than Imani's monthly rent. 1 meter away, close enough to be there, far enough not to crowd. And he said nothing at all. The alarm wailed. The seconds passed. A junior associate peered around the corner, saw the chairman sitting on the floor beside a crying child, and quietly decided he had seen nothing. Jae-won waited. He didn't know why. He couldn't have explained it if his board had demanded a reason. There was only the boy, the noise, and some buried instinct telling him that the kindest thing right now was to stay silent and ask for nothing. 2 minutes passed, then 3, and then, beneath the screaming of the alarm, came a sound so small, Jae-won almost missed it. "The light is too loud." Jae-won turned his head. The boy was looking at the ceiling speaker, eyes wet, hands pressed over his ears. Jae-won didn't understand the sentence. Lights weren't loud. But he understood. The boy meant the alarm, meant all of it, meant the whole world had been too much. So, he nodded, as if it made perfect sense. He took out his phone, made one short call, and 11 seconds later, the alarm cut to silence. The boy lowered his hands. That was the exact moment Imani Bell came around the corner at a dead run and froze. She had been ready to find her son terrified. She had not been ready to find him on the floor of an executive hallway beside a stranger in a dark suit, the alarm gone quiet, his small voice still in the air. Her son, speaking. The thing she had stopped letting herself hope for, happening in front of a stranger. 9 months of Thursdays. 9 months of silence she had learned to live inside. And a stranger had undone it in 9 minutes without saying a single word. And not even he understood why. The strange thing about that morning was how quickly the world pretended it hadn't happened. By noon, Jae-won was back behind his glass, and the 47th floor had restored its silence. The junior's associate who had seen the chairman on the floor told no one. Imani took Deon home early, holding his hand the whole way, afraid that if she let go, the spell would break and the silence would come back. It didn't come back all at once, but it didn't fully lift either. Deon spoke to her that night, 3 short sentences about a dinosaur he'd drawn, and then went quiet again for 2 days. The therapist called it a crack in the wall, not the wall coming down, a crack. Imani decided a crack was enough to keep fighting for, so she went back to work and did the only thing she had ever known how to do when life got too big. She put her head down and got very, very good at her job. And 9 days later, that was exactly what got her into trouble. It started with a number that didn't sit right. Imani had been assigned a routine compliance review of the third quarter vendor reports. The kind of task handed to the newest analyst precisely because it was tedious. Hundreds of pages, thousands of line items, the sort of work where the mind goes numb and the eyes slide past everything. Hers didn't slide past it, a consulting fee. Consulting fee. The same vendor, the same amount, paid out across 8 months. $292,000 at a time, always rounded, always just under the threshold that triggered a second signature. She pulled the thread. The thread kept coming. By the end of the week, Imani had mapped the whole pattern, a series of payments to a shell vendor that did no measurable work, totaling $2,340,000 over 8 months. Money walking quietly out a side door nobody had thought to watch. She wrote it up clean, thorough. Every figure sourced, every page numbered. On page 7, in the margin, she penciled a small note to herself. A question about one transfer date she still wanted to confirm. Then she did what a third-week analyst is supposed to do. She handed it up the chain for review before it went anywhere. She handed it to Grant Hollis. Grant was a senior analyst with 6 years at the firm, an easy smile, and a habit of being liked. Said. He took her report with a warm, great instincts. Let me give this a polish before it goes up. Imani felt a flush of pride. She had impressed someone. She would remember that feeling later. The way pride can be the thing that blinds you. 3 days after that, there was a department briefing in front of the directors. Imani sat in the third row where new analysts sat. The lights dimmed. The screen came up. And there, projected 10 feet tall in front of the entire division at 10:47 in the morning, was her report. Her pattern, her figures, her $2,340,000, with Grant Hollis's name on the title page. He stood at the front, laser pointer in hand, walking the directors through the discovery in a calm, confident voice. I started noticing an irregularity in the Q3 vendor data, he said. He said I 11 times. Imani counted. Nobody looked at her. Nobody asked her. To everyone in that room, she was the new girl in the third row, and the brilliant work on the screen belonged to the man at the front. Imani placed her hand flat on her thigh. Her fingers curled inward, one knuckle at a time, until her hand was a tight fist against the fabric of her slacks. Her face stayed perfectly still. She said nothing. She had learned this silence a long time ago, long before Deon. The silence you choose when speaking up costs more than swallowing it. The same silence her nephew had been living inside for 9 months. She understood it from the inside now, and the understanding tasted like ash. At the head of the long table, Jae-won Shin watched the presentation without expression. He was not listening to Grant. He was reading the report on the screen, 3 pages deep, the way he read everything, fast, complete, unforgiving. And when the slide turned to page 7, he stopped. There, in the corner of the margin, was a handwritten note in pencil. A small, looping question mark. A particular slant to the letters. Jae-won had seen that handwriting before. He had seen it on a folded piece of paper a child had drawn on. A paper a frantic mother had carried in her bag the morning her son first spoke. He had a memory for handwriting the way other men had a memory for faces, and his never lied to him. The note on page 7 had not been written by Grant Hollis. Jae-won's expression did not change. He did not interrupt. He let Grant finish his 11 is and accept the director's approving nods and sit back down satisfied. Then, when the room emptied, Jae-won made a single quiet call. Pull every internal draft of the Q3 vendor review, he said. I want creation dates, author metadata, and edit history, all of it, on my desk by morning. He hung up and looked once more at the frozen image on the screen. Page 7, that small penciled question mark, and something cold and precise settled into him. Not anger. Anger was loud. This was quieter, and far more dangerous. That evening, Imani sat on the floor of her apartment while Deon drew beside her. She hadn't told him about the meeting. She hadn't told anyone. There was no one in this city to tell, and she realized, sitting there, that she wasn't even sure who she would call if there were. She had spent so many years being the one who held everyone else together that she had forgotten what it felt like to be held. Deon slid his notebook across the carpet to her. He had drawn 3 figures beside a tall building. Underneath, in careful 7-year-old letters, he had written a question, the first thing he had written to her in days. Did the tall man fix your bad day? Imani stared at it, at the tall man, at the building, at her nephew who saw more than he ever said. No, baby, she whispered. Nobody fixed it. But that's okay. I'll fix it myself. She had said those 4 words 10,000 times in her life. I'll fix it myself. For the first time, sitting on that floor, she wondered why she had never once let it be anyone else. What no one in that boardroom realized was that the man at the head of the table never forgot a handwriting in his life. And by tomorrow morning, he would be holding the proof of exactly whose hands had built that report and exactly whose name had been printed over them. The call came at 2:17 on a Wednesday afternoon. Imani saw the school's number on her screen and felt her whole body go cold before she even answered. A parent learns that ring. It never means good news in the middle of a workday. Deon had a fever, 103.4. The nurse's voice was kind but firm. Someone needed to come now. Imani was already standing, already reaching for her coat, already running the math that single guardians run 100 times a year. There was no one else. There was never anyone else. Back. She would have to leave, and leaving meant walking into the one office she had been dreading. Human Resources sat on the 19th floor, behind frosted glass, and it was run by a woman named Diane Pruitt. Diane was not cruel in any way you could put in a complaint. She was something quieter and harder to fight, a person who had decided long ago that rules were a kind of fairness, and that bending them for one person was unfair to everyone else. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. This is the 3rd early departure this month, Ms. Bell, she said, not looking up from her screen. My nephew is sick, the school called. I have to pick him up. I understand. I do. Diane finally looked up, her expression smooth and unbothered. But I have to be consistent. One more, and we'll need to formally review whether this position is the right fit for your circumstances. He's 7. He has a fever of 103. This isn't a daycare, Ms. Bell. The words landed flat and final. Imani didn't argue. She had learned, long ago, that some walls don't move no matter how hard you push, and pushing only leaves you bruised. She picked up her bag, said a polite understood, and went to get her boy. She held it together through the whole train ride. She held it together in the nurse's office, in the pharmacy line, in the careful work of getting medicine into a frightened child. She did not let herself feel any of it until 2 in the morning, when Deon finally slept and there was no one left to be strong for. She sat on the edge of his bed until 4 a.m., one hand on his back, counting his breaths. She did not cry. She was too tired to cry. She just sat in the dark and did the thing she always did, held the world together with her bare hands because she had never once believed anyone would help her hold it. The next morning, swaying on her feet, she came back to work. There was a white envelope on her desk. Formal warning, 3rd violation. Her name typed neatly across the top, a line for her signature at the bottom, acknowledging that she understood. Imani held the envelope for a long moment. Then she set it down, sat at her computer, and got back to work, because that was the only thing she knew how to do. She had no idea that 2 floors above her, a very different process had already begun. Jae-won Shin did not storm into anyone's office. He did not raise his voice or make a scene. That was not how power actually worked, and he had never confused noise with force. He worked the way he always did, quietly, completely, with paper. The metadata had come back exactly as he'd known it would. The original draft of the Q3 vendor report, every figure, every margin note, the small penciled question mark on page 7, had been created 11 days before Grant Hollis ever touched the file, created by an account belonging to a third-week analyst named Imani Bell. Grant had simply opened it, deleted her name, and typed his own. Jae-won ordered an independent audit of the underlying finding because the truth deserved to stand on its own, not on his say-so. The audit confirmed everything. $2,340,000, hidden across 8 months. Real fraud, caught by the right person and stolen by the wrong one. Then he had Grant Hollis brought up to the 47th floor. Alone. No one ever learned exactly what was said in that office. The meeting lasted 9 minutes. Grant came out the color of paper, did not speak to anyone, and 3 days later submitted his resignation, citing personal reasons. He was lucky it was only a resignation. Both of them knew it. That same week, 2 things appeared without explanation. The first was a company-wide memo establishing emergency leave protections for single parents and guardians. 3 protected absences a year, no penalty, no review. It was signed Shin, CEO. The second was a quiet reassignment. Diane Pruitt was moved off the HR floor entirely. Imani found Jae-won 3 days later, standing at the window outside his office. She had pieced enough of it together to be certain, and she was not a person who could sit on certainty. "Why did you do that?" she asked. He didn't pretend not to understand. Because the report was yours, and because $2,340,000 had been walking out the door for 8 months. The firm needed to know who actually found it. That's the work reason. She held his gaze. That's not the only reason. For a moment, he said nothing. The silent sign stretched, and in it, she could feel him deciding how honest to be. "No," he said finally. "It's not." That was when her bag slipped from her shoulder and tipped, and a folded square of paper fell out onto the carpet between them. Jae-won bent and picked it up before she could. It was one of Deon's drawings, 3 small figures standing beside a tall building, and underneath, in careful pencil letters, 2 words: "The Quiet Man." Jae-won went very still. He looked at the 3 figures for a long moment. His thumb moved once, slowly, across the pencil lines, the way a person touches something they don't entirely trust themselves to feel. He did not say anything about it. He did not explain. He simply folded the paper along its original creases, carefully, and slipped it into the inside pocket of his jacket, over his chest. And then he handed Imani back her bag as if nothing had happened at all. Imani walked out of that office, not knowing what she had done. She didn't know that the man who never let anyone close had just kept a child's drawing against his heart. She didn't know that in 6 years, no threat had moved him, no fortune had bought him, no enemy had ever found the crack in the ice. She didn't know that a 7-year-old's crayon, and the woman who carried it, had just done the one thing the whole world had failed to do. They had made Jae-won Shin keep something. The past did not knock. It never does. It arrived on a Thursday, in the form of a single sheet of paper that Jae-won found waiting in the private safe behind his office. A safe only 3 people on Earth had access to, and 2 of them were dead. It was a photocopy of an old ledger page, his father's handwriting. A list of names and numbers from the world Jae-won had spent 6 years burying, and clipped to the corner was a note in handwriting he hadn't seen in years. "You can keep pretending you're clean, or you can remember who paid for the building you're standing in. Your choice." Was Minso. She had been his father's partner in the parts of the business no one spoke about, and she had vanished the year his father died. Now, she had reached into the one place Jae-won believed was untouchable, just to prove she could. The message, underneath the message, was simple. "Come back to the old ways and save the deal I know you're about to lose, or I burn down the clean life you built." Jae-won set the page down on his desk with a steadiness he did not feel. He was still standing there, very still, when his phone rang. It was Hyun-woo. His voice, normally flat as a closed door, had an edge to it that Jae-won had heard maybe twice in 9 years. Boss. The school. Hartwell Elementary, Brooklyn? A pause. A man was asking the crossing guard about Imani Bell's family. 20 minutes ago. He's gone now. The cold that went through Jae-won had nothing to do with fear for himself. He had spent his whole adult life being the most dangerous thing in any room. He had never once, in all those years, felt the particular sick weight that landed on him now. The weight of knowing that the people who wanted to hurt him had found something he actually cared about. His lawyer called 90 seconds later, before Jae-won had even moved. The man was breathless. Someone had filed a records request digging into the original source of the Shin family fortune. Someone who knew exactly where the bodies were buried, metaphorically and otherwise. 3 signals. A document, a phone call, a confirmation. The old world had come back for him from 3 directions at once. Jae-won did not send a car. He did not send Hyun-woo. He did not call ahead. He went to the school himself. He stood by the curb outside Hartwell Elementary in a $4,000 coat, looking absurdly out of place among the minivans and the chalk drawings, and he waited until the doors opened and the children poured out. Deon saw him first. The boy stopped on the steps, and for one terrible second, Imani, 3 feet behind him, scanning the lot in confusion, thought something was wrong. Then Deon's whole face changed, and he ran, and as he ran, he said 3 words, loud and bright, in front of teachers and parents and a dozen other children. Hi, quiet, man. It was not a miracle. Imani knew that. The therapist had warned her there would be no single moment, no flipped switch, only a road. Walked one uneven step at a time. Deon would still go silent some days. He would still freeze at loud sounds. But here, now in the open air, in front of strangers, her nephew had said hello to someone he trusted. The road, it turned out, ran straight through this man. Get in the car, Jae-won said quietly. Both of you, please. You can't just... Imani. Her name in his mouth was not a command. It was something closer to a plea. Please. She got in the car. For the first 4 minutes and 37 seconds since no one spoke, Hyun-woo in the front seat counted it the way he counted everything, and in the back, Jae-won told her the truth. Not the polished version. Not the version that made him look good. He told her where the money had come from, what his father had been, what he himself had spent 6 years quietly dismantling, and who had just come back to drag him into it again. He told her that the man at the school gate was a message, and that the message was about her. When he finished, Imani was quiet. She looked out the window at the city sliding past, her hand resting on Deon's knee, and Jae-won braced for the thing he deserved. Disgust, fear, the sound of a door closing forever. Instead, she asked one question. Is Deon safe? That's why I came, he said. He will be. I promise you that. She nodded slowly. Then, softer, looking not at the city but at him. And you? Jae-won opened his mouth and found he had no answer. Because the honest answer was no. The only way to make Deon truly safe, the only way to take away every weapon Minseo had, was to stop hiding, to hand the old ledgers to the people who could act on them. To publicly burn the source of his own fortune and walk away from the deal that would have made him richer than his father ever dreamed. It would cost him the deal. It would cost him connections he'd spent years cultivating. It would cost him the silence, that perfect, protective silence that had kept him safe for 6 years. He chose it anyway, not out of fear. Fear had never once made Jae-won Shin do anything. He chose it because he could not keep living 2 lives. Wives, while a woman like Imani held the world together with bare hands, and a boy like Deon learned to speak again one careful word at a time. He could not stand in their light and stay in his own dark. So that night, after the lawyers, after the calls that would change everything, Jae-won sat in Imani's small Brooklyn living room. a place his old self would never have set foot, and let himself simply be tired. And something happened in that room that had never happened to Imani Bell in her entire life. She let someone help. She didn't reach for the phone to fix it alone. She didn't say, "I'll handle it myself." She sat on her own couch and let another person carry part of the weight. And the strange thing was that it didn't make her smaller. It made the weight smaller. That was her victory. And it belonged to no one but her. Deon came in from the hallway then, holding the one toy he had brought all the way from Savannah, a scuffed plastic robot, missing the paint on one arm. He climbed up beside Jae-won and pressed it into his hands. "So your bad days get fixed too," the boy said. Jae-won looked down at the little robot in his palms. He had negotiated billion-dollar deals without blinking. He had stared down men who killed for a living. And he sat on a worn couch in Brooklyn holding a 7-year-old's broken toy, and for the second time in his adult life, he could not find a single word to say. Imani had spent her whole life holding everyone else together. Her sister, her nephew, her job, her dignity, all of it, alone. That night, for the first time, she let someone hold her, and neither of them would ever be the same again. 3 months can change the weather of an entire life. But by February, the man who had stood at the school gate in a $4,000 coat was a different kind of powerful than he had been in October. Not louder, not richer, just lighter, in a way that no one could quite name but everyone could feel. The deal he was supposed to lose, he lost. On purpose. He let it go the way you let go of a rope that's been burning your hands for years, and he did not look back at it. Grant Hollis was no longer a problem the firm had to manage. The fraud he had tried to claim as his own discovery had become the fraud he was now, thrown under federal investigation for failing to disclose woes. Along with several other things the audit had shaken loose. His lawyers were quietly preparing him for the possibility of 5 to 7 years. He had stolen a brilliant woman's work to look important for 9 minutes. It had cost him everything. The emergency leave policy Jae-won signed in October was no longer a memo. It was simply how Shin Capital worked now. 3 protected absences a year for any parent or guardian, no questions, no penalty. Other firms in the district had started quietly copying it. A single sick child, it turned out, had rewritten the rules for thousands of people who would never know the boy's name. And the source of the Shin fortune, the buried thing, the thing Min Siu had tried to use as a leash, was no longer buried. Jae-won had handed it over, all of it. The old ledgers, the names, the history. He had sat across from federal investigators and told the truth about what his father had been and what he had spent 6 years undoing, and he had accepted that the truth would cost him. It did. He sold off an entire division worth hundreds of millions, severed relationships he'd spent a decade building, and watched a certain kind of door close to him forever. He had never felt freer in his life. As for Deon, the change was the slowest and the most real of all. There was no miracle. There never had been. There was a boy and a therapist and a Thursday every week and a road that ran uphill in both directions. But by February, Deon was talking to his teacher. He was talking to a boy named Theo who sat next to him and liked the same dinosaurs. He still went quiet on hard days, still froze when an alarm cut through the air. But the silence no longer owned him. It was just weather now. And weather passes. His mother, Renee, was getting stronger too, 440 miles away. She would not be whole tomorrow, but she would be whole. And Deon talked to her on the phone now, every Sunday, in a voice that grew a little surer each week. The quietest moment of all came on a Friday in February at Hartwell Elementary's Family Day. Each child had been asked to invite one special person. Deon told his teacher without any hesitation at all, "I want to invite the quiet man." Imani hadn't dared ask Jae-won. She knew what his calendar looked like, knew what a man like him was worth by the hour. But that morning, when she walked Deon to the school doors, Jae-won was already there. He hadn't told her he was coming. He had simply come. Deon spotted him and ran, and Jae-won caught the boy out of the air without thinking, the way you catch something that belongs to you. He stood in the middle of a loud, bright school courtyard, surrounded by crayon banners and paper streamers. His left arm held a 7-year-old. His right hand held Imani's. He was not looking at a camera. There was no audience that mattered. There was no empire watching, no rival to impress, no silence to maintain. He simply stood there, in the noise, and let himself be part of it. No one had cured him. That was the thing Imani understood now, watching him. Love hadn't reached into his chest and flipped some switch from cold to warm. It was simpler and stranger than that. A traumatized child had chosen him, not because he was kind, not because he performed warmth, but because he didn't perform anything at all. Because when the world got too loud, the quiet man sat down on the floor and asked for nothing and stayed. Balak. And in being chosen by a boy who trusted almost no one, Jae-won had remembered who he'd been long before he became the thing the world was afraid of. Imani had learned something too, that holding the world together with bare hands was not the only kind of strength. That letting someone else take one corner of the weight didn't make you weak. It just meant you were finally not alone. It should have been the end of the story. It wasn't. That night, in the top drawer of his bedroom dresser, there was a small box. Inside it, a ring, a black diamond, 4.8 carats, set in rose gold. He'd had it made for Imani over 11 weeks, designing it himself, telling no one. He had decided he would ask her in the spring. His phone rang. The screen said blocked. He answered it. A woman's voice. Calm, almost gentle. The kind of calm that makes the hair rise on your arms. You've been making peace with your past, Minsu said. It's sweet, really. But your father's death wasn't what you were told, Jae-won. And the Bell family, Imani's family, they were there that night. A pause, soft, as a blade sliding home. Ask yourself why your father had their address in his coat pocket the night he died. The line went dead. Jae-won stood in the dark of his bedroom, the small box in one hand, the silent phone in the other. He looked down at the ring he'd had made for a woman whose name had just come out of the mouth of his oldest enemy. He looked at the screen, where the word blocked faded slowly to black, and he felt the ice he thought he'd melted begin, quietly, to creep back into his chest. So now you know how a boy who hadn't spoken in 9 months found his voice, and how the most feared man in New York found something he thought he'd lost forever. But I have to ask you, and I really want your honest answer in the comments. Do you think Imani and Jae-won can survive what Minseo just revealed? Or is some truth too heavy for even the strongest love to carry? Because if her family really was there the night his father died, everything you just watched is about to look completely different in part 2. And trust me, what Min Siu knows changes all of it. Drop a comment right now and tell me what you think really happened that night. I read every single one, and your theories genuinely shape how I tell these stories. If this one moved you, if you believe a child can see the good in a person the whole world gave up on, hit that like button so it reaches someone who needs to hear it today. And if you're not subscribed yet, now is the moment. Tap subscribes and ring the bell so you don't miss part 2, because you do not want to find out what was in that coat pocket a day late. Thank you for spending this time with me. Take care of the people who hold your world together, and let someone hold yours. I'll see you in the next one.